All right, welcome back. It is Tuesday, 9 September. I'm going to get into what happened at the Ramot Elon intersection yesterday in Jerusalem. All right. Do they have any more of this? No, I guess that's it. All right. So let's go on to another news story about this. Hold on one second. And watch this guy right here, this taxi driver. Okay. Now, most taxi drivers I know in Jerusalem have guns. So he could have come out with his gun and started firing back. But what he chose to do, okay, is protect his passenger, this little old lady here, okay? So watch this guy. Incredible. You hear the guns, the bullets are being sprayed all around in here. Now, that gun they just showed right there, that's kind of it's a modeled Carl Gustav. This is a homemade gun, okay? You see how rough it looks? The Palestinians, a lot of them don't have access to weapons. So they're manufacturing their own guns at home. And then they get bullets and basically they just go in and start spraying.
כולם בורחים. יש פה איזה פיגוע בצומת רמות, יש פה פקק מטורף.
You see this? Hamas did not take responsibility for the attack, but praised what he called the heroic an exceptional operation by two Palestinian resistance fighters. They're murderers. You're not a resistance fighter if you're shooting down little old ladies and rabbis and old men. That's not resistance. Rape is not resistance. Murdering old people is not resistance, folks. If you want to go toe to toe with our soldiers, fine, do that. But don't be going to fucking bus stops and then just opening up on civilians. You're no better than a goddamn murderer. It's not resistance. Killing innocent civilians is not resistance. There's some kind of sick mentality inside the Palestinian community that legitimizes the murder of civilians, which I don't understand that. That there's something very seriously wrong with the mind of the entire Palestinian community and Arab community.
Okay, can you please tell us what's happened here this morning?
הרציחות הללו, הפיגועים הללו, בכל הגזרות, הם לא מרפים את ידינו. הם רק מגדילים את הנחישות שלנו, להשלים את המשימות שלקחנו על עצמנו. גם בעזה.
That's the head of the police right there in Jerusalem, dude. Look at that guy. One fucking badass.
גם ביהודה ושומרון, בכל מקום.
You see, these guys didn't come from Gaza and start attacking soldiers in Jerusalem for resistance against the fight in Gaza. They came from Ramallah, okay? Controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And now that they're dead, guess what, folks? Their families will receive money, a pension for life from the Palestinian Authority. Money coming from the UN, money coming from the European Commission, money that was coming from the United States to aid the Palestinians in building schools and hospitals and roads and infrastructure, goes to the families of the murderers. Okay? It's no difference than if, somebody set up a trust fund for the families of Ted Bundy or the Giglio Beach killer or the Sunset murderer and gave them a pension because their sons murdered people. These aren't heroes. These aren't resistance fighters. These are murderers. They're not militants. They're murderers. And what is this? On demand news. It says it comes as Gaza has experienced dramatic escalation of violence. No. The same intersection was attacked in 2023 and 2017, folks. The same fucking intersection before any of this happened in Gaza. In January, February of 2023, a guy went up there with a knife and started attacking people. In 2017, they left a bomb and blew it up and injured people. So when people make the apologists for the murderers come up and with these lame excuses and say, oh, they're just resisting, because of what's happening in Gaza. Bullshit. They've been doing this for almost 100 years now, folks. They attacked Jews in Hebron, ran all the Jews out of Hebron in the 1920s. They attacked Jews at the Western Wall in the 1930s. They were attacking Jewish villages in the Palestinian uprising against the British in the 1938, and then in 1948, 47, 48. So this has nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza. It has always to do with the Arabs' complete, utter denial of the right of Jews to live in their own land and exist. You don't see Jews going to Jordan or Syria or Gaza or Egypt and gunning down little old ladies and old men, just randomly just pulling out a machine gun and gunning them all down. Now, they may get killed in Gaza as, casualties of war because they're too near a fucking target, but you'll never see soldiers or civilians, whatever you want to call them, Jewish fighters, go into Jordan and rape women en masse, or go into Egypt and rape women en masse, and line men up against walls and gun them down and chop off the heads of babies and burn down their houses. It just doesn't happen, folks. The reason this is happening is because of the complete, utter resistance of Muslims, not just in the Palestinians, but all across the world, in ignoring Israel's right to exist. We have a right to breathe the air, to walk among the flowers and the trees and the streets, and not have to worry about being murdered every fucking day. The reason, and we'll just give them enough land. Oh, we'll just give them a state and that'll stop, right? No, that's not the reason. Let me show you something. In 1948, 49, this white line is the ceasefire line. It's called the Green Line. This is where the fighting stopped. It's not a border line. It's where the Jordanian Army Arab Legion stopped fighting the Haganah, the Jewish army. But even after 48, from 48 to 67, they had snipers along this line firing at any Jews out in the open. This is not a border. This was a ceasefire line. It meant that we weren't going to cross it and they weren't going to cross it, but they still shot at us. If all they wanted was a state, if all this violence has to do with just getting their own state, they could have had a state in 1948 to 1967. But the Jordanians didn't want the Palestinians to have their own state. They wanted to control Jerusalem and the West Bank. And that's exactly what they did. And the Egyptians could have declared a state in Gaza in 1948, but they didn't trust the Palestinians. Matter of fact, to this day, they don't allow Palestinians into Egypt to seek medical care. During this whole war, they built 4 walls to keep the Palestinians in Gaza and not flooding into Egypt. So they're trapped in Gaza. They can't go into Egypt for medical care. But from 48 to 67, they could have had their own damn state because Egypt controlled Gaza. But did they create their own Palestinian state in Gaza? No, they didn't. They controlled it, and then they armed the Palestinians. They brainwashed them with propaganda. They paid them to go and attack the same the same kibbutzim that were attacked on 7 October. The Egyptians were paying them from 48 to 67 to sneak in at night and attack them. Did they let them create their own state and their own government? No, they didn't. They ruled Gaza from Cairo. Same thing with King Abdullah. They ruled the West Bank from Amman. They didn't allow Yasser Arafat to come in and set up a Palestinian state. They only set up the Palestinian Authority in 1965, the Palestinian terrorist group, and it only gained a footing in Jordan in 1967. In 1970, they tried to kill King Hussein and overthrow the Jordanian state and make it a Palestinian state. But guess who saved King Hussein's ass? The Israeli Air Force, because the Syrians were sending down tanks to assist the Palestinians to overthrow King Hussein, and the Israeli Air Force came in and stopped them. So what happened today is just another continuation, has nothing to do with the war in Gaza. It has everything to do with the Arabs' complete mental illness about the state of Israel. They refuse to accept that Jews have always been in the land and that Jews have a right to have their own state in the land. We tried Oslo. We tried to say, hey, wherever there's Arab majority, that's going to be a Palestinian state. Where there's a Jewish majority, that's going to be the Jewish state. Bill Clinton said he offered Yasser Arafat 96% of the West Bank. And then the other 4% they could take out of the territory of Israel and create their own Palestinian state. Yasser Arafat wouldn't accept it. Ehud Barak, the prime minister at the time, offered Arafat the entire old city except for the Jewish quarter. The Mount of Olives, all the West Bank, except for the Jewish settlements. Yasser Arafat refused to accept it. Soon after that, the Camp David Accords, they started the suicide bombings. Not only was Hamas doing the suicide bombings, Yasser Arafat's own Al-Fatah, Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade, started strapping explosives around their waists and climbing onto buses and blowing themselves up and killing old ladies and old men. They could have had their state many times, but they always resisted. Again, it has nothing to do with them having their own state. You know, these Europeans and some Democrats run around saying, hey, well, we envision a Palestinian state living next to in a Jewish state in peace. It's not going to happen. It's a dream. Oslo was 30 years ago, folks, more than 30 years ago. And instead of getting peace, what we got was more war and more death and more destruction. And if we just give them more of a state, if we just give them more land. They don't want land, folks. They don't want a state. They want us dead. They don't want us existing. Because to have a democratic Jewish state that's not controlled by Islam is like a cancer to them. They can't have that. And to have a democratic state shows the rest of the Arabs that, well, how come we can't have a democratic state? There's not one democratic state in all of the Middle East, folks. Not one. They're all run by kings, princes, sheiks, dictators, strongmen, all of them. Even in Jordan. If you get rid of the democratic state, you end any kind of hope for democracy and equality among all the civilians in the Arab world. That's why they want to destroy Israel, because it's a threat to their autocracy and their dictatorships. Because as long as Israel exists, there's hope for Arab democracy. There's hope for equality. Islam, if you look up, and I'm not against all Muslims, folks, but Islam doesn't mean love. It doesn't mean help thy neighbor. It means submit. When they're bowing down, all facing Mecca, they're submitting to their God, Allah, a war god, by the way, of the Arabian Peninsula, who they made into a universal God. Islam means submission. It doesn't mean love. It doesn't mean peace. Oh, yeah, they have peace. Peace at the end of a sword. Once you chop off enough heads, you're going to have some peace, I guess, right? This is why they attack us. We won't submit. We won't bend down or bend the knee to them or to Islam or to their God. When you see them firing at people, that is their way of trying to make us submit. And we're not going to submit, folks. We're proud Jews. We created our own state with our own blood. Over 10,000 Jews died out of a population of, what, 200,000? That's equivalent to over 1 million Americans dying in a civil war. What, 500,000 Americans died in World War II? Imagine 1 million or 2 million Americans dying in a war. That's what Israel lost, because they came with their armies from Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, and their tanks and their airplanes and their rifles and their armies. And they raped and they burnt and they pillaged to drive the Jews into the sea. That was their mantra, to drive the Jews into the sea. There were 25 million Arabs in all those countries and only 500,000 Jews. They were determined and confident they would win. But we beat them. But they never surrendered. They never got a peace treaty. That green line was their ceasefire line. It wasn't a border. It was where they stopped fighting. And in Islam, they have a concept, I believe it's called the Haditha, which is a temporary truce. And that doesn't mean the war's over. That just means that they're resting and rearming so they can come kill you later. But we're not going to submit. We're not going to submit to Islam. We're not going to submit to the Palestinians. We built our own state to have a safe place for Jews, okay? And now they want to make it where Jews are not safe anywhere. They're wrong. They're going to lose. They're losing. They've lost for what, 80 years they've been doing this, attacking us? Really over 100 years. They started attacking us back when Jews first started to become the majority, back in the 1920s and 30s. So let's get into this. In this video series, I'm going to do my Jerusalem. I'm going to show you where I live, where I've been around. I love Jerusalem. It's the best city in the world, folks. I get out and walk around. There's probably not a street I haven't been down in Jerusalem. Not only is it healthy to walk around in the bright sunshine on a beautiful September day, right before Rosh Hashanah, you can't beat it, folks. Jerusalem is the city of dreams. Jerusalem is the city of God. This is why they want to control it, because Allah is not God, but they can supplant Yahweh by taking over Jerusalem. Why do you think they built the temple, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, on top of the Temple Mount? Because that's the earthly home of God. And they wanted to say that we control it now. Allah is now God of the world. Whenever you see Islam out in the world, they didn't get there by love and peace and helping thy neighbor and building communities and lifting people up. They got there by the sword. They rode in and killed everybody and raped the women and took them back home with them as their second, third, fourth, fifth wife. Jerusalem is the third most holy city in Islam. The third, not the first, the third. When they pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they don't face the Temple Mount. They face south. They face south down to Mecca. I mean, can you imagine? Oh, you're my third best friend. Oh, you're my third favorite girlfriend. You're my third favorite wife, right? How do you think that person's going to feel? Jerusalem was nothing but an outpost to them. When you're out conquering the world and making everyone submit, you can't have people running around saying, "Hey, we own the city of God." That's why they're attacking us. Not because they want a state, not because they want the land. They can give a fuck about the land. Because when they're finished with us, if they destroyed the Jewish state, guess who they're coming for? They're already coming for you. You in the Western world, you in Asia, you in Africa. It's all expansion. We're just the speed bump along the way. But they're not going to win. We're going to stop them. There are a lot of ignorant people out there, like the Spanish minister, the Irish prime minister, the UK prime minister. They're going to recognize a terrorist state. They could have recognized a Palestinian state back in 93 with the Oslo Accords. They could have recognized a Palestinian state 20 years ago, 10 years ago. But why do they recognize a Palestinian state after they have murdered 1,200 Jews and raped God knows how many women? That's rewarding them for their violence and their murders. But I digress off my pedestal here. So I'm going to show you my Jerusalem. It's my Jerusalem. It's not Ahmed's. It's not Allah's. It's my Jerusalem. It's the Jews' Jerusalem. It's our Jerusalem. It belongs to us. It's always belonged to us. The Muslims that you see attacking us are attacking us because they want what they don't have. And if they can't have it, they don't want anyone to have it. They want to destroy it all, burn it all down. When you look at Islam, and I'm just being frank here, I'm not being anti Muslim, but I'm just telling you the facts. Where are the Nobel Prize winners in Islam? There's a few, but there's a billion Muslims, folks. There's 15 million Jews, and yet the majority of Nobel Prizes go to Jews. Why is that? Because Jews build up things. Islam makes people submit, and you can't be creative when you're submitting in fear. And you don't have those democratic educational institutions. It doesn't exist in Islam. And it's not just Gaza, it's not just the West Bank, it's not just Syria, it's not just Egypt or Jordan, it's all across the Muslim world. And you look in the world today, wherever there's some kind of war going on, 90% of the time, there's some Muslim militants involved, either fighting the government or the government suppressing some other minority. That's just the facts, folks. I'm sure there's some good people in Islam, Muslims, right? There's good people and bad people everywhere. But the majority of people in Islam go along with all this. You look at the latest polls about 9/11, resistance, all terrorism, the vast majority are in league with that. In league with murdering old women, old ladies, and children. Anyway, so I just want to take a look. I'm gonna go all over Jerusalem here. Just gonna do a video every couple of days, and I'm gonna show you the good and the bad of Jerusalem. But also, I want to show you this road here, okay? So, if you look, there's the old city. This valley is the Nahal Sorek, okay? It's fed by these different areas here, but it generally starts here and then it starts slipping back down to the Jordan Valley. The peak is called French Hill. This is Nahal Sorek. During the summer, it's dry, but during the winter, it turns into a river. It's a pretty fertile valley. And as you can see, any army coming to Jerusalem, the old city, traveled up the Nahal Sorek and then down to Jerusalem. The Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Ottomans, the Arabs, the Crusaders, the British Army. They used the Nahal Sorek, and now it's used as a highway called Highway 1. All right, I got to watch my time here. Okay. So this is the intersection right here where the attack occurred. If I can get this to work. Now, these pictures are dating back to 2011. They've done a lot of construction since then. But basically, the attack occurred right here. That bus you saw, the cab, was all right here. Okay. These guys got out, walked out with their guns, and opened up and started shooting everyone, and they started running this way. This is the third attack that's occurred here. Uh, they built like a little bus station here, and it didn't show it here, but that's what it is. Now, I used to live right. Oh, oh, I'm sorry. I'm facing the wrong way. The attack's occurred right here. Okay, right there. I used to walk down this sidewalk all the time. I worked in Jerusalem, and I worked sometimes to 1, 2 in the morning. And by then, the buses had stopped. So I'd have to walk home. It probably took me an hour to walk home. But that's okay. It's good because I was 50 at the time. And that's good for your heart in the exercise. And, sometimes there'd be a fantastic full moon coming across. Now, here, this picture was probably taken, what? Yeah, November. You got clouds, but generally it's usually sunny. I live back in this neighborhood right here called Ramot. This used to be controlled by the Jordanian army. They built this area called Ramot, um, starting in the 70s. And they built this other one here on both sides where these hills are, and that's to keep the Arabs from coming down and sniping at us like they did before. Now, back in 2008, I had this girlfriend, and she was looking for a job as a caregiver, so she could work in Jerusalem. And there was this Canadian woman, Orthodox, and her husband was, she was Asian. And I don't know if she had converted or what, but her husband was Canadian, white Canadian. And we went to, the reason I went because it's an interview. I went because I worked nearby. So we went down, went to the interview. I just kind of sat there while she went to the interview. And then we went back to where I was working at. I worked right here on this hill called Har Hotzvim. It's a high-tech park. I worked for a company called IDE or IDT, I believe, doing marketing. And so we went there, and just pretty wealthy lady, Orthodox definitely. And I thought she was going to get the job. And then they said, "Oh," and this is like October of 2007, and they liked my girlfriend at the time and wanted to hire her. And then they said, "Well, the only thing is that in October, or no, excuse me, June to September, we go back to Quebec in Canada, and we live there for 3 months, and we want you to come with us." And I was like, "What? You want her to go to Canada, live in Canada for 3 months?" Now, my girlfriend at this time, she had lived in England for like 5 years or so, being a caregiver and studying English. And so she didn't see the big deal about it. But, we were going to get married. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, my wife's going to go live in Canada every year for 3 months away from me. And I said, well, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? We're going to get married. And she goes, oh, you can come with us. And I said, well, I just got here to Israel and I want to stay in Israel. I don't want to live in Canada for 3 months in Quebec. I don't even speak French. And she thought it was funny. And um, my girlfriend could tell that I didn't like the idea, but I wasn't going to tell her, no, you can't take this job. And so then we got a bus and went back. And along the way, I said, look, you can do whatever you want, but if we're going to get married, then you go live 3 months out of the year in Canada. I'm not going to go to Canada. I said, I do what you want. And then she eventually told me, she said, I'm not going to take the job. So then she eventually found another job someplace else. But that was quite interesting. And I used to go hiking all the time. You'd be, you know, um, on Shabbat, Saturday morning, I would wake up and then I'd have to hike all the way that way because there's no buses. Okay. Usually I either hiked up this road and then went up this way, it's a long ways. Sometimes I'd cut through here and go to this little area called Lifta. Now, Lifta was a small Arab village. Okay. Um, Unfortunately, it sat right on the main, across from the main road. This is where all the supplies came in 1948 to feed Jerusalem. The Jordanian army was trying to starve the Jews out. 100,000 Jews in Jerusalem. And so the Arabs in Lifta, you know, and this is one thing the Westerners have just don't appreciate or understand with Arabs is that there's total resistance, okay, and mobilization. That means that each village would supply all of their men from 15 to 60 to fight. The Arab Legion would give them guns, and they would go out every day and shoot at people on the road, okay? And then the women would bring them water and food, and the children would run and bring them ammunition and water and food. So the entire village was involved in the resistance. It's not like in the Western world where we mobilize, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, train them and send them off to foreign countries to fight. The entire village was involved in the fight. And this is all across all of Israel. Wherever there was an Arab village, they were resisting and fighting. So you couldn't have people, you're trying to bring in convoys of food, you couldn't have people firing at those convoys. So they had to go in with a Haganah and, fight house to house, street to street, and defeat these guys. They took whoever was left prisoner. The women and children went off to Arab controlled East Jerusalem, and the men went off to prison camps, and then they were released after the ceasefire in exchange for our guys. But this village was wiped out. You see? There's the road right there. You can't have them coming up and attacking the road all the time. Just not realistic. So that's interesting. Now, there's another place right here, and I don't think I can get a good view of it, but we'll try. Let me see. Oh, there's also like a little spring that I walk by that people are always going down there and soaking in. Let's see here. Now they put in a bike trail and a hiking trail that goes all the way around Jerusalem. Now, that right there is a guarded, gated, steel doored bunker. Okay? Everybody knows about this. I'm not giving away any fucking secrets, but this goes deep, deep underground into Jerusalem. Okay, all under Jerusalem are tunnels and bunkers for the government, for air raid shelters where people can go. All catacombed, all under Jerusalem. There are miles and miles and miles of it. Okay, this is the main tunnel here. You can literally drive a truck right into there. And I'll get to this in a little bit, but right over here, or no, over here, there's a new train station. You can see the train line right here. That train took, what, probably 10 years? And see, it comes out from underground. It goes underground here. It comes out into the open, crosses the valley, goes underground here, crosses the valley here, goes underground, goes underneath the Arabs, and then comes out over here all the way to Tel Aviv. And you can get from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv in like 30 minutes. Whereas before, the train station is like southwest of Jerusalem. It took about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. And I think sometimes you had to switch a train at Lod. So that was very fascinating and interesting. I'm going to come back to Jerusalem in just a second. Now, one thing I wanted to get into before this video ends, there is this place over close to where I live called Tel Motza. Okay? Tel Motza is an archaeological site, and it sits right underneath this Highway 1 bridge. This Highway 1 bridge is elevated across this valley. The river, when it flows right, you can see it right here. And then you have Tel Motza. Now, Tel Motza is a temple. There's actually two sites. There's the ancient Tel Motza temple, and then there's the more recent Tel Motza temple. The ancient one is over 10,000 years old. The more recent site is about let's see, 3,000 years old. Okay, so what Tel Motza is an archaeological site, and what they did is they found. You see, they built another road, a bypass road, and it goes through these hills here. I live like close to there. And so from 8,000 BC to about 3 or 4,000 BC, there was a temple site here, and there was a granary. Now, temple sites and granaries make a lot of sense because, you want to worship the gods to have a good harvest, okay? And when you put your grain in a collective silo, that offers more protection than if you're just storing it yourself. Okay? So they built these granaries. You can see they go down into the ground here. These granaries are over 10,000 years old. The temple, you can see some of the temple wall right here. Inside the temple and all around the temple, they found these little figurines of animals, of goats, of cows, of their gods. There was a male god and a female god. Okay? And so they would worship for the gods to bless their harvest. These little figurines of the goats and the cattle were so they could capture them. Goats and cattle were like deer. They weren't domesticated yet. There's not even grain and agricultural yet on a vast scale across the Middle East. It starts here and in northern Iraq and southern Turkey. This site is contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, which I think is about, what, 10 to 8,000 years old. But in Göbekli Tepe, there was no village, there were no homes. People came to that site from miles and miles and miles away. At this site, it was surrounded, the temple was surrounded by a walled city 10,000 years ago, folks. Okay? The people that lived there were ancient Canaanites. The ancient Canaanites, despite what the Bible says, in archaeology, evolved into, or a branch of them evolved into the Jews. Now, the word Jews comes from the tribe of Judah, which is the one tribe that was left after the other 10 tribes got sent off into exile in Assyria. But the tribe of Judah, that's where you get the word Jews from. But Judaism evolved from multiple gods up until the time of the Babylonian exile in 500 AD. Jews worship multiple gods with Yahweh as the prime national god. Okay, there's a contemporary temple here besides this 10,000-year-old temple. Just south of this temple, there was a temple that existed from 1200 BC up until about 500 BC, and the temple in Jerusalem only existed from 900 to 500. So this temple site outdates that temple site in Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount is, supposedly built by King Solomon, right? When you look at the setup for this temple, it's exactly like the temple site by King Solomon, the same exact measurements and diagram as the one done by King Solomon in Jerusalem. Okay? So, what this tells you is that this site was used as a model for the temple that was built in Jerusalem. But at this temple, they worship Yahweh and Asherah, the female goddess. So God had a wife. And so the archaeologists have proposed that Yahweh was the Canaanite El, and once he became the national god of the Jews, of Israelites, the Hebrews, then he became Yahweh, or the unpronounceable name. And you'll read about in the Bible, the prophets are always railing against, the Asherahs, the worshiping of other gods, or the temple is going to be destroyed. That actually didn't occur until after. When you see the temple destroyed and they come back from the exile and they rebuild the temple, that's when it's just the one worshiping of one God, and all the other gods have been cast out. But here at this site, the people were worshiping multiple gods with Yahweh as the primary God. Okay? The number one God is what they're finding. So Tel Motza is probably one of the most important sites in the world. It goes back to right after Göbekli Tepe. It was contemporary with Göbekli Tepe after about 8,000. Göbekli Tepe gets buried about 7,000. But this site maintained and kept going. So they found items from Turkey, items from Yemen, and items from Egypt. So there was a constant trade going back and forth. And if you figure this site is kind of like at the crossroads of all these different civilizations, it makes sense that this would be a stopover site on your way back and forth between Egypt and Samaria, between Sudan and, or excuse me, between Yemen and Turkey. It makes perfect sense. All right, so I got about 5 minutes here. The problem for Jews and for Muslims is that what this site says to Jews is that there was no Abraham coming from Samaria. There was no Moses leading the Jews across, or the Hebrews across the Sinai. Judaism was indigenous and evolved out of the Canaanite religions. It evolved from multiple gods to one God. All, you look at old cars, you look at Model Ts, you look at the cars made in the 50s, you look at the cars made in the 80s, and you see the evolution of those cars, like Corvettes from the 60s to now. I don't know if they still make Corvettes. So you see that evolution. And what you see at Tel Motza is the evolution of monotheism starting here. There were multiple gods, and then after 500, this temple gets destroyed by the Babylonians along with the temple in Jerusalem. The one reason that in the Bible, because a lot of the prophets that you're reading are writing backwards. Everything's already happened. They're already in exile, or they've come back from exile, and they're writing it as a warning of what happened to tell the future. Okay? They're telling people, look, this is going to happen. They've already seen it happen, but they're writing about it like it hadn't happened. They never mention Tel Motza because they want to confine people to worshiping the one God, the national God. But that's all we have. The Persians are ruling, so the national God becomes the symbol of unity. So we're not just assimilated into Persian culture, okay? And then later on, Greek culture. It all starts right here at Tel Motza. Another problem for Islam is that it proves and shows that Jews were indigenous long before the Muslims. The Muslims come riding in and chopping heads off in 600 AD. This is 8,000 BC, folks. Over 8,000 years before, Canaanites were evolving slowly into one God, Yahweh worshiping Judaism. And it's all right here in Tel Motza. They're very quiet about that because archaeologists don't want to get involved in politics, but that's what the archaeology tells you. You can see these caves. These caves are used 100,000 years ago, folks, by hominids. You can even see the layering. You see the layering right here? The Nahal River comes in, carries stones in the water, drops it off, and you see the different layers. You see there's a darker layer here for fertile ground, and then you've got the different layers going down right there. All right, I think I'm about out of time. Yeah, we're out. We got 1 minute. So Tel Motza is where it's at, folks. This is my Jerusalem. It doesn't belong to the Arabs. It doesn't belong to the world. It's my Jerusalem. It's the Jews' Jerusalem. It's our Jewish Jerusalem. Okay? All right, take care. All right, bye-bye.